Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for SF Doc Fest. The festival will be running from June 1st through 11th, both digitally on your computer screen, but also in San Francisco at the historic Roxy Theater. We're so lovely to have the filmmakers join us today from our Slice of the Bay program, which you're watching it online, so way to go. You won. But you can also come down and see it at the Roxy Theater. It'll be screening on Saturday, June 3rd at 2:15 p.m. So if you're in town, please come and see our faces in the flesh. I would love to kick things off by introducing our wonderful filmmakers. Thank you all so much for being here today. And we'll just start off with Emily. Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you. I am the director and producer of the film called Not Another Ballet Story.
Thank you so much. Hi, Rashawn. Think.
Hi, I'm Rasan Thomas, director of Friendly Signs, as well as the producer and the writer.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Hi, Jonathan.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Jonathan. I directed and edited Chicken Stories.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I directed and filmed Immune.
Thank you. Hi, Chi Chi.
Hi, I'm Chi Chi. I co-directed and co-produced Stone Dove.
Lovely. Thank you. And hey, Samay.
Hello, I'm also co-producer, director of Stone Dove.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for letting us share your stories today. I think it's a really beautiful kind of look at so much of what makes the Bay Area a wonderful place to be, and kind of highlights some of the really rich cultural landscapes that we are all navigating in our lives. So thank you. I would love to now shift over to talk about your films. I would love to know kind of how you discovered your subject, what made you decide to tell this story, and we'll go back to Emily. Hi, Emily.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. I am originally from the North Bay, and the executive producer on my film contacted me after she saw another ballet-focused film that I had edited, that she was impressed by, and told me that she had a story for me back at home. And so she had been working with Smuin Ballet, which is the ballet studio that the film focuses on, for a long time, and had sort of some interesting ideas about what was going on there that's different and unique to ballet culture. And it sort of took a few trips out to California. I now live in New York, but it took a few trips back home to sort of figure out what exactly I wanted to talk about it with Smuin in the film. But we got incredible access because of the executive producer, Cynthia Wuthman's longtime commitment with them. And they welcomed me into rehearsals and backstage, and sort of allowed me to tell a very unique story, I think, to ballet, which is about equity and the progress of specifically women in ballet. And as we were working on it, the things that really interested me were how movement can communicate storytelling, which, as someone who's not a dancer, I didn't really have a full understanding of, but being welcomed into that space, I really gained an appreciation for it, and then started asking myself questions about authorship. And so that's really where the nugget of the story began.
Lovely. Thank you so much for sharing. Hi, Rashawn. Can you speak about the genesis of your film?
Yeah, I got into documentary films by being in documentary films. I was incarcerated at San Quentin State Prison, and I watched people. I just lucked up. I don't know. I ended up being in like 5 different documentaries, and one of them I felt done harm, and I felt like I wanted to learn how to make documentaries so we could tell our own stories. And I feel like telling being system impacted and telling stories of the people around you, being embedded in that world, you could do a better job because you know who's who, you know what questions to ask, you know the real from the fake. and people are willing to talk to you at levels that they're not willing to talk to other people, that you have that comfortability, and you know that you're going to care about their story because you're living it with them. You know that story. And so, and one of the documentaries was with Christine Yu. It's called 26.2 miles to life. And I asked her, would she mentor me and help me try to learn how to make documentaries? And so one of the people in my running club that's in the movie as well, is named Tommy Wickert. And I watched Tommy Wickert. I'm in prison with him, and I watched this guy's growth and change. He's an extremely nice guy, extremely patient guy, but he's a guy that's been convicted of a violent crime. And he's a guy that society says, okay, we can let out the people who committed nonviolent crimes. And so society's going by crime and not by person. And that's why you have a 47% recidivism rate, because they're going by crime, not by person. And ironically, lifers and people who have committed violent crimes have a 2% recidivism rate in California. You know what I mean? So it's crazy. But anyway, I wanted to do a documentary about Tommy because he's just an awesome guy. And also, he was championing the rights of deaf people. And I felt like I'm in prison, I'm invisible, but deaf people were invisible to me. And so how can I highlight this guy's growth and his change, but also highlight the deaf community? And so the story had to be told. And I'm looking forward to actually telling part 2, Silent Treatment, which is more focused on the plight of deaf people.
What an amazing journey. Thank you so much for sharing that and highlighting the importance of authorship, especially in documentary. So thank you. Jonathan, hi, can you speak about the kind of way that your film came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. It started in 2019 by like a really random series of events. Some friends and I moved onto like a small farm property in the East Bay, in Castro Valley. And we like inherited a couple of animals when we moved onto the farm, but none of us knew really how to farm. So we were kind of in this like period of time where we were like really trying to figure out like, okay, how do we like take care of these animals in this land well and do it justice? And so there were like goats and cows and chickens and animals like that. And I just like immediately like became like obsessed with the chickens, like weirdly so, would like just like follow them around after work and like kind of watch them. And I was really struck by like this animal that is usually like pigeonholed as like being this stupid bird. There was actually like so much going on when I like actually stopped to pay attention. And there were like these really interesting like interflock dynamics. And like, you know, if you like followed them around long enough, you'd see these like behaviors that they'd repeat. And I just like, I was struck by how like human they seemed to me after like spending enough time with them. And so I just started filming them out of fun and just like enjoyment and wanting to observe them. And then of course, like, you know, my roommates and I are like, we're trying to figure out like how to care for chickens when we don't really know what we're doing. So we're doing a lot of Googling and, you know, it's kind of like the film is like this like earnest portrait of like being in progress and not really knowing how to do this thing, but like doing your best to figure it out. So yeah, it started from just like the idea of like, I think it'd be really fun to film these animals. And then it eventually snowballed into this like, what if you could make a farm documentary where the chickens were the main characters and not the people that were managing them? So then I just kind of, you know, I didn't set out to like make a film in the beginning, but then it just kind of one thing led to another. And people started saying like, oh, this actually could be like a doc. So I put music to it and title cards and made it into what it was. Thanks so much.
It's awesome. Thank you. Hi, Jessica. Can you speak about your film?
Yeah, thanks for having us. So for my film, I actually work at UC San Francisco, and a few years back, I had heard about a lot of kids who, as babies, were being flown out from the Navajo Reservation in Arizona to San Francisco for treatment. And I got sort of interested in the story and found out they all had the same rare genetic disease. And as someone who comes from a community that has a lot of genetic diseases and also found out I had a pretty deadly one that I was a carrier for, I was kind of interested in this. So I started speaking with some of the doctors who were doing this work, and it turned out that they were actually going to be doing a gene therapy trial for this disease that would hopefully cure it. So I've ended up following a 9-year-old girl from Arizona for a couple years, actually, it's probably actually a few years. And at some point we got a little bit of funding, and the one of our funders let us know that this disease is also very prevalent in the Amish. So I ended up traveling to Indiana, Amish country as well, for this project, where there's also a very high preponderance of the disease. So we followed a father there who had lost 4 children to the disease, unfortunately. And as you may or may not know, the Amish don't really do cameras. So part of the film is sort of just his voice and animation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Samay and Chi-Chi, like your film is so poetic and expressive. Can you talk about what made you decide to engage with the story and how your approach to story making came around? Sorry, we can start off with Chi-Chi and then kick it over to Samay.
So May, why don't you start and then kick it over to me?
I don't think we can hear you, Samay. Says that you're not muted, but
Okay. My internet's kind of lagging
yeah.
right now, but the film, it's rooted in the collective that we have. Oh, hold on one second.
Technology rules. Yeah, sometimes if you turn off your camera, it frees up some bandwidth.
Okay, I guess I can just start maybe while Samay's figuring out the audio. Yeah, I'll just maybe say that we decided to make this film because we wanted to platform kind of sex worker voices in our community and like really put it in a context around like possibility and legacy, as well as like themes like prison abolition and like political activism. And like I felt that we were really drawing from the rich history of sex worker activism, especially around prison abolition and just like radical resistance movements and queer movements in general. And yeah, we kind of took a more like poetic approach because we wanted to legitimize like different ways of storytelling, like storytelling with bodies and movement, as well as a more like conversational tone. And then because like sex work is still, it's, I guess like accepted in the Bay Area, but because it's more of like a criminalized, it's definitely still criminalized and definitely more stigmatized. We had to think a little bit creatively with how we were going to shoot things. And so all of the people in the video are still anonymous, mostly for safety. But yeah, I guess it's just like our friends, and we thought it would be cool to have a conversation.
Yeah, no, it really comes across in a genuine way. If that, I don't know, makes sense. Like there's something really poetic about hearing the unfiltered testimonials matched with the poetic imagery that you created to accompany it. I think that it is really effective. It comes across quite lovely.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I was definitely kind of like, I don't know, I think like documentary is hard because like sometimes there's like an agenda or like a thing that you're trying to get everybody to like understand. But I really think the takeaway for me is like just listen to sex workers and like create space for nuance and like conversation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that there's something overall with this entire program that really touches to themes of advocacy and representation that come across really beautifully. I think from allowing imagery to be shown of authorship, especially within these different kind of spaces like ballet or within sex work, or advocacy within the space of communicating with the incarcerated deaf community, or advocating for those with genetic differences, and showing how communities come together to kind of figure these things out that could be life-saving, especially for underserved communities like Indigenous folks and even the Amish. So I think it's really commendable that these stories come together. And then you have this kind of verite look at life, right? Like Chicken Stories, you have this like beautiful slice that feels incredibly authentic, but also really compelling, because like how often do we think about taking on these adventures, right? Like as like folks that are living in populated cities, like it's a whole new kind of way to access the way of living, but in some ways it kind of can free us from the capital machine. So it's really cool. I wonder if Simi's gonna be able to join back. I'll keep an eye out to see if she's able to hop back on and we can pivot back over to her. But just to go around and just talk about a few of the films individually. Emily, we touched about this a little bit, but can you talk about the importance of female authorship within your subject, but also just within your work in general?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think I am interested in women's stories about the public, and just as a queer person, like interested in sort of disrupting sort of more typical narratives to see what is going on beneath the surface. And ballet is a particularly rigid world when it comes to gender. Like I said, I sort of got into it not through dance myself, but through being a part of a more character-driven project that I was editing with another queer subject who was challenging expectations within their work. And so that's sort of where my interest lies, is in the change makers within that industry. Ballet is so demanding creatively and on the bodies of the folks who bring us that art, and also just culturally, that it's a very it's a delicate thing to witness, but I don't think that there's really much delicate about it other than that. And so I was especially curious about, you know, there's this image of the ballerina that's very gendered often, and also extremely sexualized in its representation. And basically the research that I did, and what Amy Seiwert, especially, who's one of the subjects of the film, has been doing for a long time, is drawing attention to the lack of equity in higher positions in ballet, including in sort of the administrative roles, which are in charge of hiring and power dynamics as well underneath them, and also in choreography. So those two things are related. But if we think about choreography, these are the authors of the stories, and ballet being so heavily associated with the female body, and with like a really particular type of female body, there is so much happening when most of the choreographers throughout history are male, and the types of stories that are able to be told, and also the types of like movements that these bodies are sort of required to perform in order to fit into this idea of femininity. It's pretty antiquated. And although there's a huge respect for the art, and the art also has such a strict, again, like line of tradition, it's difficult to disrupt that culture while still paying homage and still sort of like remaining within ballet. So the studio that I was working with, SMU and Ballet, which is in the Mission in San Francisco, they're a contemporary ballet studio. They've been around for about 30 years. They were founded by a male choreographer, but when the male choreographer passed on kind of early in his life, another subject of the film, Celia Fuchsil, picked up where he left off as artistic director. And in taking the helm as artistic director, she brought on more interesting choreographers. She also she programmed more choreography by women, which is, you know, a job creating position in a freelance field, which I think all of us understand how important that is. And then she also is creating and presenting opportunities for dancers to try their hand at choreography. And I think when there is that power dynamic between like the visionary and the sort of like subjects of that vision to bring us as audiences that art, Celia is really sort of turning the key exactly where it needs to be to be respectful of the traditions of ballet, but also hand power to people who have gotten to experience it by doing it and seeing what other types of stories we can tell, what other types of language we can develop within this one culture. And it's cool to see. I mean, even just like very young dancers whose careers are limited by what their bodies can give them, and by ageism as well, are suddenly given this opportunity to speak and to write and to shift these stories, which you were saying authorship, I think, and Rashawn speaking about the authorship, like within documentary, we know how important it is to like hand the power of storytelling to those within the culture. So I'm proud of Celia, I'm proud of the dancers, and grateful to have been a witness to it.
So beautiful. Thank you so much, Emily. I really, really appreciate your words on that subject. Just so true, right? Creating spaces, creating opportunities, and like understanding when you should step back and allow others to have that moment. Which brings me back to Rashawn. I mean, obviously, there's something so interesting, especially for us directly in the Bay Area. So many stories do come out of San Quentin, and obviously it's a big part because of the proximity to the Bay Area, which is arguably one of the documentary centers of this country, if not the world, right? I was at an event once and somebody said if a bomb went off, there would be no documentaries for the next 5 years because there's so many documentary filmmakers that were in that one room. But I'm so intrigued just about having the ability for you, Rashawn, to realize that you need to take control of the narrative and how your mentorship is working out throughout this process. Like what has that been like for you? How are you able to kind of enact the tools that you needed to be able to tell these stories?
Yeah, so first of all, I was blessed to be at ironically, a prison that had a media center that enabled us to like use Sony A7 cameras and Mac computers with Final Cut Pro 10 to even have the power to do anything. And then meeting Christine Yu, she helped me like provide technical knowledge that I didn't have. Right, I know as a writer, I know how to tell a story. As a person embedded in San Quentin, I knew what the stories were and who the right characters were and how to go about telling that story, but I didn't have the technical skill necessarily, right? And even though we have that media center in San Quentin, we get trained every once in a while when a volunteer comes in. Other than that, we're on our own, just experimenting and watching whatever videos we can get our hands on. We kind of bootleg training. So it's invaluable to have her involved in it. At the same time, I was the director. I got to boss people around. I got to tell the story the way I wanted. Like we would have, I would take her, I would listen to her input. At the end of the day, I get to decide how the story should be told. And it was told in a way that I was comfortable with. And ironically, I didn't listen to most of the advice and it came out pretty great. But it was great to have that advice. And like, I definitely learned a lot. And now I'm got the bug, man. I want to continue making documentaries and feature. I want to make a feature film next, and just keep doing this, and just keep telling people, you know, and just changing how films are told. Like, I think not only should the characters, not only should we be telling our own stories, but like the characters should be possible compensated. You know what I mean? Like, nobody should make a career off somebody else's story, and the people in the story don't benefit from that in some kind of way. So I feel like that we need to make new models where it doesn't feel like colonizing, where you're just coming and taking, extracting, right? I feel like the people that are system impacted, man, it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of pain that goes into films. And we should be benefiting from that as well as controlling it.
100%. I mean, one of the sad facts about just the arts in this country is that it's often coming from a very privileged place, right? You have to either be completely dedicated to sacrifice to make your art, or you have to come from a place of privilege, which I agree the system needs to change. And I love your fight to bring more equity to that, especially within the way folks are benefiting from telling the stories of others. It's really beautiful. Thank you so much. Jonathan, I mean, you were talking about how within Chicken Story, you had this imagery that you were like, oh, hey, here's the thing. Did you realize that you were making a verite film? Did you think about kind of form as it was coming together, or?
I think maybe later in the process I started to think about it. In the beginning, I was just like filming with total enjoyment, and just like with the idea that like, I don't care if anyone ever sees this. I don't intend for anyone to see this. So I mean, yeah, the fact that it ended up becoming a film and is playing places and people are watching it is really, really fun, because it's kind of like one of those lessons that you hear, but like for me, I had to learn it for myself, where like the thing that you are most interested in that you don't think anyone else is interested in, like you are the first audience member, and what you care about counts for something. So yeah, that was fun. And in the beginning, I was like, when I was filming it, I was like, this is going to be like a 30-minute documentary. There's going to be no humans whatsoever, no narration, no title cards, no music. It's just going to be chickens. And if you're into it, you're into it. And if you're not, you're not. And that was the first cut of the movie. And I was into it. I was like, this is cool. And then, you know, the idea that like we were always Googling things and trying to figure out, okay, well, how do you get the chickens to lay in their nesting boxes? I was like, well, if we were able to provide like the slightest bit of context to like give meaning to what we're seeing, then maybe that'll actually help it be more accessible to other people that are watching it that maybe aren't as interested in watching the nuances of a chicken's face as I am. So then that's when the Siri narration came in, and I realized that could be sort of like a framing device for the story. And also like it's kind of like there's an interesting like juxtaposition of like farming is this very ancient thing that people have been doing for ages, but the ability to like instantaneously access information from like a device in your pocket to figure out how to do that well is like a relatively new thing. So like the combination of those two things I thought was one of the other things that pushed it from being this thing that I'm just filming for fun to like, okay, maybe there's like something that's more deserving of like a film here.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think the framing device was really effective. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Jessica, can you talk about how you gained access to your subjects, especially like going to like Amish, like an Amish home, navigating those things, going to a reservation where things are, you know, still in some ways economically depressed, or like what was that like to get in touch with these folks and get access to tell these stories?
I mean, it was really awesome. I used to work in journalism, so I really like sort of experiencing new things through the projects I'm doing. And in terms of like how we connected, so as I mentioned, I have a UCSF connection. So when I was originally, the first group of people I spoke with about this film were the doctors who were working on the potential cure. And they had a yearly trip to Arizona and New Mexico, where they would see their patients because it was just too difficult for the patients to come all the way to San Francisco each year. So it was much easier for the care team to go to them. And so I went with them the first year, like as an exploratory thing, and met some people and really connected with this one family who had, at the time, she was like 4 or 5, the daughter, and she was planning to go through the gene therapy trial. And so I was following her for a while and was lucky enough to get a little funding from a nonprofit that works with this condition. And they told me that the sort of the Amish connection, and I got really interested. I was like, this is interesting that, it's affecting these two communities that are so different, both in terms of culture and geography, and the sort of the strange juxtaposition, because I ended up going to Indiana in November of like the heat of Arizona in June versus how snowy and absolutely freezing it was in Indiana in November that year. But so this person, Glenn, who we interviewed with his wife was a lot shyer, so he was the one who ended up doing most of the speaking in the film. He was known to the nonprofit because he was like an activist in the Amish community in terms of sort of cataloging everyone who had been affected. So he has this whole written record of every person who has been diagnosed with this disease and or who has been tested and is a carrier. And he is very involved in getting people tested and trying to get them treatment. As you probably know, they're like very remote out there and there's not a lot of medical care. So in his case, the reason that he lost so many children before they figured out what was going on was because they were just basically, it was something that happened like apart from much medical care. And then it was also in the 80s, so it wasn't as common to test for this kind of thing. Now all the states have newborn screening and everything like that, but it was just kind of this mystery for them why their first 3 and then their 5th child died of this condition.
Wow. The power of archiving and keeping records and sharing information is so important. Thank you so much. I'm not sure if Chi-Chi or Simei are gonna be able to rejoin, but if they don't pop up, I think we are going to go ahead and wrap up. I feel so lucky to get to share your stories in this program. Thank you so much for making your art and letting us bring it to our audiences. I hope I can see some of you at the Roxy on June 3rd. And just please keep telling your stories. We're so excited to see what comes next. Thanks to everybody.
No, thank you.
For asking such good questions and moderating so well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And thanks to our audiences.
Thank you.
Take it. All right.